Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. It is day 7 of our 12 Makes of Christmas series, and today we are doing a new tutorial of one of our oldest patterns, Ghost of Christmas Past. A long time ago, before we sold like actual fabric at Quilt Addicts Anonymous, we used to do quilt exchanges. So this is something that you guys can get together with your quilty girlfriends for. If 18 of you all go buy a yard of fabric, you will have plenty to do the exchange with, and you will be able to have all kinds of mishmash of Christmas scraps. Or if you've been quilting for any length of time, you probably already have enough in your stash. We were able to get enough just from the extras from the projects we did for this year's 12 Makes of Christmas. We just pulled red and green scraps from all manner of things, from everything we had left over, and we threw it all together. Because here's a good hint about matching fabrics when you're doing a scrap quilt. The more of them you have in there, the less it matters if all the reds match all the reds and all the greens match all the greens. So in this quilt specifically, we have designed it so that no red is ever touching a red. It's always touching a green, and same with the greens. There's always a red next to it. So that way there's kind of a buffer and a neutral zone. So that way you can use everything you got, throw it all in there, and it will just be a lovely sort of memory quilt of all the Christmas projects that you have done over the years. It's a really simple pattern to do. We just need to be able to do some half square triangles and get some points where they belong. We have an entire video tutorial series on mastering triangles. It's our triangle masterclass, but I'm going to go over what you need to do in today's video as well. But if you need extra help, make sure to check that out. It's totally free to take the course, and you can do it in your own time, and you should really enjoy it. And we had a lot of people take it over the summer, and they really learned a lot, even if they've been quilting for a very long time. All right, let's get into Ghost of Christmas Past. The pattern is available as a PDF on our website. If you do decide to do it as an exchange with your quilty girlfriends, I just ask that you all purchase your own copy of the pattern, because that technically works with copyright laws, and it's a great way to support us and all of the tutorials that we bring to you guys online. All right, so we're going to start just by making our half square triangles. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and just flip that. There is no right or wrong side for the solid fabric that I'm using for the background, and I do recommend that you use one solid, because that will give the eye a place to rest and help the rest of your scrappy quilt turn out looking scrappy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up my ruler so that it's even with the points, and I usually use a friction gel pen for this, but I can't find mine, so I'm going to use a pencil instead. And I'm just marking from the center out. And I like to mark from the center out because that way the fabric doesn't kind of shift around on me. And also I love to do it on a pressing mat of some kind, because again, that helps kind of hold it in place, and then it's not going to be shifting around. Because what I found prior to the pandemic when we were teaching in person is if people don't mark right into that corner, then when they go to sew, they typically don't sew right into the corner either, and then one half of your triangle ends up being too small, and you wonder why. And it's because when we're sewing, we tend to follow the line instead of adjusting to make sure that we're going straight out to that corner. All right, so we're going to go ahead and layer these guys right sides together. Now, pinning is absolutely not necessary, but if this is your first time using this method, you might want to give it a try. What you're going to do is you're going to line up your top 2 points, and then you're going to pin across them. We're going to sew down both sides of this drawn line. So we want to make sure that these corners stay together. And I've seen people like pin way out in no man's land over here. Well, that gives this area where it really matters that they stay in place a lot of room to move. So you really want to always be pinning right where that 1/4 inch seam is going to be, to make sure you're holding it together where it matters. So now typically when we sew, what we do is we line up the edge of the presser foot with the edge of our fabric, and that's how we get our 1/4 inch seam. When we're doing half square triangles from squares, which is my preferred method because you sew it together before you cut it apart, so your bias is much less likely to stretch out on you, which can be a problem when you're making half square triangles, is we're going to sew and pretend that this line that we drew is our edge of our fabric. So we're going to sew all the way down one, sewing a scant 1/4 inch seam. Then we're going to flip our block, and we're going to sew all the way down the other. So you can feel free to chain piece these. It is really very simple. I will caution you that you have 2 different sizes of blocks in here. You need the larger one to make the half square triangles, and then the smaller ones are just going to be plain squares that we're going to place next to our half square triangles to make our large pinwheels. So I've set my sewing machine up to sew a 1/4 inch seam. Now I'm going to move my needle so that it goes 1 needle width to the right. That's going to give me a scant 1/4 inch seam, which is really helpful when we're making triangles from this method because it gives us just a little bit extra wiggle room so our triangles turn out the right size in the end. If you need more of an explanation from that, make sure to check out our masterclass, Triangle Masterclass. If you watch the half square triangle video on that, we go into great detail about the scant 1/4 inch seam, what it is, and why you want to use it. All right, so what I like to do is just get that point lined up right underneath and start sewing a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and remove that pin because we don't want to sew over pins. You can break a needle that way. And now I'm just keeping that line lined up at the edge of my presser foot. I'm going to sew all the way down. Now when I get to the bottom here, I often find that people have a hard time maintaining that even 1/4 inch seam all the way down. Then you end up with smiley or frowny faces because your seam doesn't stay straight. So what I like to do when I can't hang on anymore to that tip is I move my finger to the side and I just stitch down that way. And that way I'm able to keep that nice and straight and parallel with that line that we drew all the way down. Feel free to chain piece at this point. You're just going to lift up and slide your next one in. I've already got all mine together, so what we're going to do is we're just going to pull it out. No need to clip those threads, and we're going to stitch down the other side. One other tip is one time I watched someone try to do this with the start-stop button on their machine, and you really need to be able to control your speed. So you can speed up in the middle, slow down at the end. So that is not a good idea. Make sure you're using your foot pedal for this. This is a really good time for a quality check. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to measure from seam to seam, and hopefully I'm going to be somewhere between 3/8 and 1/2 inch. You can be up to 1/2 inch and still have this work out fine with the math, but somewhere between 3/8 and 1/2 inch is your sweet spot. Less than 3/8 of an inch and your seam is going to be too skinny, so we don't want to do that, but I'm right smack dab in the middle, so that's perfect. All right, I'm going to flip this over and just cut down my drawn line. Doesn't matter if you're perfectly on it, but again, make sure you don't have too skinny of a seam or that seam can pop open with use or even just when you put it on the long arm to quilt it. All right, I always press my seams open when I'm making half square triangles. It makes for really flat seams, great joins, and anybody who tells you it weakens a seam doesn't know what they're talking about. They're a member of the quilt police. Just run away. It's just fine. And you're going to be able to have fabulous, fabulous results by doing it this way. All right, so I've got that one pressed open. We're going to do the other one, then trim this down. Now this step is one that usually people want to skip and you don't want to. I know I did when I first started quilting, but the results are so much better when you trim it down to size. All right, so we're right here. I need to trim this down to 4.5 inches. So there's a specific way I want to line this up so that I make sure that my points always go out to the points. So the biggest thing I need to do is make sure the 45-degree line of my ruler is going straight down that seam. If it's off, then that point is never going to be able to go to the point because it wasn't there to start with. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and line that up, and then I'm making sure that I've got a little bit of fabric hanging off past 4.5 and then also past on this side. I like to put my pinky on the side because that helps make sure my fingers are out of the way of the rotary blade. And also make sure you're using a sharp blade because that if it's dull, it can kind of push the fabric out of the way in that corner, and then you still don't get it straight to the corner like that. All right, so that's looking absolutely fabulous. We got our point going straight to the corner, exactly what we want. So now we're going to give that a 180-degree flip so that the side I cut is now on the left and the bottom. And we're going to line everything up again. So this time I'm again starting with that 45-degree going straight down the seam line. This time though, I'm making sure that my edges that I've already cut are right on 4.5 because we've already done that, and at this point we just need to square up the other side. Then we can go ahead and give it another trim. And we're good to go. Now this might not look like we've cut that much off, and we really haven't, but it does make a big difference. When we put it next to the other one, you can see a marked difference in the size. So when you go to put this next to all your other squares that have been cut just to size, it's going to fit perfectly. It's going to lay so much flatter, and it's going to make quilting a whole lot easier. All right, let's get this block together and then we are ready to enjoy all of our scraps from the holiday projects all in one quilt. All right, so this is a big block. We're using a lot of scraps in here. We have not repeated one at all. So either you need to have a big Christmas stash or you need to do an exchange with your friends. But we got this one going the wrong way. We want to have pinwheels. So you can see that I included some teals. We ended up with a lot of teal Christmas prints and also some pinks that we subbed in for red for this quilt. And so you can see that we've got green, and red, green, red. So because we're never matching any two, it doesn't really matter if all of our reds match each other or if all of our greens match each other, because since there's that buffer of the other colorway, it looks totally fine the way it is. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start sewing these together. There are not any points to match in the rows. So we don't have to worry about matching points until we start sewing our rows together. So I'm just going to start sewing across. I'm going to sew all these columns together and all these. Then I'm going to join my halves and we'll go from there. I probably should note here that I'm moving my sewing machine back to that regular 1/4 inch stitch. We only need that scant 1/4 inch seam when we are working with creating the half square triangles. Also, if you wanted to pin these, you could. I typically just line everything up because I've taken that time to trim everything down, so I know it's going to match. So I was a little mistaken. We do have to match these points here. So what I'm going to do is flip these guys right sides together. And then since we press our seams open, it's really easy to see what's going to what direction. So what I do is I just layer those right on top of each other. And I try to make sure that my seams are lined up right on top of one another. And then I pin in the right side of that seam allowance. That way when I sew, I can stitch all the way down here, stop with my needle down in that first half of the seam allowance, then pull the pin because that needle down is going to kind of hold everything in place and act like a pin, and I can make sure I've got that perfect point at the center of the block. We'll do the same thing for right here. Usually at the stage 2, before I press from the right side, I like to take my spray mister and give it a little mist. What it does is it turns any liquid into an aerosol, and I prefer to use this than putting water in my iron because I think it makes the iron last a lot longer. My other Aliso I've had for at least 5 years and it is still going strong, nothing's spitting, we're not getting any gunk out. It's because there's never been water in it. I always use this. All right, this is looking fantastic. It is so flat, it is so pretty. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna join our rows. I'm gonna show you my 2-pinning method to make sure that these points always match up every single time. All right, so we want to make sure that these points come together perfectly when we join our seams. And I know my husband one time looked at this and was like, it's not to the edge. And it's like, it's not supposed to be. You're supposed to have about 1/4 inch between where this point is and the edge of your block because that's where your seam is. So we're going to go ahead and flip these guys right sides together. And you can see that this makes a nice little tiny triangle where the seam comes together. I'm going to put my pin in right at the tip of that tiny triangle, right in the middle of that seam. This is another really good reason for pressing open because you can see where all that is, whereas if it was pressed over, you might not be able to. All right, now we're going to find the same tip of the tiny triangle on the other side, and we are going to pin right there. Now, it's important to note that despite our best efforts, these may not be exactly 1/4 inch away from the edge. So if your edges aren't perfectly in line, don't worry about it. I'd rather have it be off a little bit on the inside than where you're never going to see it, than off on the outside where everyone's going to be able to tell your point didn't match up. All right, so I've got my pin so that it's going straight up and down. Now, I don't want to rock this because if I rock it and pin with it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this top fabric forward and the bottom fabric toward me, and then my points won't be right on top of each other anymore. So this is where I take a second pin and I put it in that seam allowance on the right side. Now it's important to pin right where you're going to be sewing. So you can see I've got my pin coming in right where that seam allowance is and coming out right on the other side of it. If you're pinning way off in no man's land here, maybe going across, then that's not going to be in line anymore and things can move around quite a bit on you and then you don't have good joints anymore. Now here, I don't have that to worry about. I just have my 2 seams and they're very stark fabrics. So I can just make sure that those fabrics are in line right on top of each other. And then we're going to, again, pin in the right side of that seam allowance. I always, when I'm stitching, I sew until my needle is fully down in the first half of that seam allowance, and only then do I remove my pin, because that allows me to get right up to it and hold everything together before I take that pin apart. So that's why I really don't like, for piecing, those 1/4 inch that have a little flange on the side, because it really kind of gets in the way of pinning and having accurate sewing. All right, so I'm going to do the same double pinning for these triangles, and then we are ready to sew these rows together. Here's a very good example of where these points are not even. I'm getting it straight through the point there and straight through the point there, and I've got maybe 1/8 of an inch difference between the edge of this and the edge of the one below it. I'm going to let that be. I'm going to let it be off a little bit on the inside, because I would rather have that point look good on the outside. I'm going to do a little bit of a close-up look at what I did here to kind of fudge it a little bit on the inside. So this was where our points matched up, but our edges were about 1/8 of an inch off. So this one was 1/8 of an inch in from here. So what I did was, when I was stitching it, I sewed just 1 needle width to the right of where that point is, so that way when I open up, my points are going to be perfect. And then it was a 1/4 inch away from here. So what I did was I lined up my corners at the end, and then I use this as my 1/4 inch guide, and I just kept my presser foot in line with it, and I let this gradually get back to where it's supposed to be. So if you look on the inside, obviously not perfect, but when we open it up on the inside, look at that joint. You cannot be much happier than that, and once I get it pressed open, it's going to be absolutely fabulous. So if you're gonna have something not be right, let's have it not be right on the inside where no one's ever going to see it, and have it look fabulous on the outside. So at this point, you want to make sure you're doing a lot of lifting and pressing, and really opening those seams up with your fingertips as you go, because we don't want to hit any of these other seams as we go, press them in the wrong direction. All right, that's looking pretty good. I'm definitely going to give this a spray, but this looks fantastic. We've got a nice straight line coming through here. We have a nice straight line coming through here, and that's the one that was hot mess on the inside. You're never going to be able to tell on the outside. I find that the combo of the Oliso, the spray mister, and the felt pressing mat is just absolutely perfect for getting these seams super, super flat. And it just looks so beautiful. And we're going to be able to quilt, if we want to, right into those points and really just have a lot of fun. And for anyone who's on the fence about pressing with your seams open, they're like, but I can't stitch in the ditch. Well, you're just going to stitch right next to the seam, because there is no ditch. So if you wanted to outline, you would just stitch right along the sides here, and it would be no problem. And we can quilt right into those corners, and they're absolutely beautifully done. And we have lots of videos to show you how I do that, and they all have held up great over the years as we've used them. All right, I'm definitely going to use my 2 pinning method when I pin the centers together, because I want that point to be absolutely perfect with all of those 45-degree angles coming together. I just realized that I probably wrote this pattern before my own conversion to pressing all the seams open. So it probably tells you to press things to the side. So ignore that. Press everything open. The results are so much better, and your possibilities are just limitless when you are quilting, because you're not going to run into a seam like this that has a lot of points coming together, a lot of fabrics, and it ends up just getting bulky and you can break a needle. This is just super, super flat. All the points look absolutely fabulous, and I just can't get that with pressing it to the one side or the other. All right, at this point, I like to give the block one final press. We're going to obviously get the seam that we just sewed, but I'm also gonna go over everything else. You don't want to kind of iron it like you would a shirt, but you do want to make sure you're hitting those seams really well, just getting it nice and super, super flat. All right, so here we have it. This is our block for Ghost of Christmas Past. It's fabulous for using up all those scraps from your holiday projects. And it's kind of just like a little memory quilt of all the quilty projects you made. We have projects from our tree skirts in here, from some pillowcases that we did. And it's just so much fun to look at things like this and just remember the other projects and know that it's okay if they don't all match with one another. We have another Stephanie here now who actually sewed and prepped this for me. And what she did when she was arranging it for the quilt that we did, because we remade the whole quilt, or we're remaking it, it'll be done by the time you see this video, is she organized the individual triangles so that those fabrics match with one another. So like all of these are from different lines, but they work together because the reds are coordinating with the little red in the soldier's uniform. These are all from the same line. These are all from the same line. These are all from the same line. So you can mix and match a little bit easier that way because this individual triangle looks fabulous and this individual triangle looks fabulous. And when they all come together, you have the different, you don't have your reds or your greens ever next to each other. So it doesn't matter if this green and this green don't really go together. And this green definitely doesn't go with that teal, but in the end, it all looks great and it all looks fabulous because we've created that separation. We've used a single white for the background so that everything can match. And in the end, you can pick your favorite fabrics for your border. So make sure you check out the pattern. It's called Ghost of Christmas Past. We do have a lot of Christmas yardage, including some new stuff that's on the way. So make sure you head on over there to grab something for your borders and grab that pattern. If you are doing this with your quilty friends, you're going to want to you need 18 friends, and each of you needs 1 yard of green and 1 yard of red to cut up to exchange with and have some fun with. And then you also are going to want 1.5 yards of white for your background. You are going to want 1.5 yards of red for your big border and 1.5 yards of your green for your skinny border and your binding, and you will be good to go. All right, well, check that out. Have some fun, get scrappy, have some fun with your friends if you don't have a big stash. It's really easy to mix and match. Just make sure everybody knows how to cut properly so that you're starting with the right size stuff and you will be good to go. All right, well, I hope you're enjoying our 12 Makes of Christmas series. We have more coming for you. We've got a new video every day between now and December 12th, and we have lots more fun projects planned for you. All right, until tomorrow, happy quilting.